Kevin Talbert. Was one of the people that helped start SOLIR. At the time, I was the director of the extended campus programs at SOU, which, for those that come more recently, it was the continuing education, summer session, senior programs, youth programs, distance learning, pretty much all the non-traditional, and including non-credit and non-departmentalized programs that the university offered. It was a very eclectic organization with lots of different things, and it was during an age when we had an opportunity to be entrepreneurial and to figure out new things to do, and there weren't too many barriers to doing that. I was very active in the National University Continuing Education Association at that time, on the national board, and I remember going to a national conference someplace and hearing about this concept of learning and retirement, or institutes for learning and retirement. And when I came back, I remember talking with Barbara and especially with Gene Stallman and with Meredith Reynolds. Meredith was also part of the extended campus and was the statewide director of Elder Hostel that was headquartered here and had programs elsewhere around the state. So between Gene Stallman, who worked for Phil Campbell in housing, but was responsible for, along with other people, for the very large, we were one of the largest residential elder hostel programs at that time in the country here at SOU. And so Gene was very familiar with working with seniors. Meredith had a lot of expertise working with seniors, and I had, and other people within extended campus programs had a lot of experience kind of with starting and running programs, especially self-sufficient programs that weren't funded from some grant source or other source. And so I remember coming back from that conference around 91, maybe possibly 92, talking about this concept. We were all pretty excited about it. We said, oh, Ashland would be exactly the right place for something like this. And the next step I remember was I made an appointment and went over to Churchill Hall and met with President Joe Cox, Cox Hall here on the campus. Joe, you know, was a very successful president, very personable, kind of willing to talk to anyone, and a person who is really open to new ideas. And I can remember describing this to him because he wasn't familiar with the idea, and told him that we had an idea that this could work here, and asking for his support because we needed to go out and invite community people to come on campus. And we were particularly interested in recruiting some of our retired faculty. And so, you know, we didn't want to just go off and start doing something that public without having the blessing of the president. And he was just very supportive. He said, yeah, go ahead, try it, see if you can make it work. And so, as I said, the people that I remember, and I hope I'm not overlooking somebody or not forgetting somebody, but Meredith, Gene, Barbara, and I met and kind of brainstormed who would be people that we could bring in from the community, from the emeritus faculty that would have an interest in this. And we eventually convened a meeting in SU 313 with around maybe 15 to 20 people that were kind of that mix of community people, emeritus faculty, and staff people. I remember specifically Mary Chrisley, who was had been the Dean of Students or Vice President for Student Affairs, who had retired a few years before that and was very influential here in the community. She her willingness to come was kind of a coup because it brought somebody of stature from the community. And I mentioned in the notes I gave you Lee Mullings, who had been a professor of maybe sociology or something, but he was somebody with a lot of interest in senior programs and aging that had retired recently. And I think there were a few others, possibly Hal Clore from the psychology department, who also was interested in aging. But I'm not sure if he was at that meeting or at later meetings. Jean and Meredith, but Jean in particular, knew who the people that they had been employing for Elder Hostel program as hosts were, that were really kind of go-getters and doers, and would be good in helping to start something. And so she recruited, 4 or 5 of those folks. But the ones that I remember well and who I always credit with really the success during those early years were Bill and Lee Simmons. Lee became the first president of the SOLIR Council, and I attended all the organizational meetings and worked with Lee and Bill, but Lee in particular during those first 2 or 3 years, and especially during the first year or so when it was really iffy if it was going to happen. There were barriers to overcome, as you might imagine. Could a group like this use college space without paying for it? There were some that said, well, they should pay their way just like any other off-campus group. And we're trying to say, well, this really wouldn't be just an off-campus group. This would be a organization that would be affiliated with the university. And so there was controversy about space, and as I noted, Phil Campbell, the director of housing, who I think was early on kind of a skeptic, but Phil was a very visionary person. He's the one that gave the support, that built their elder hostel programs and the Center for Shakespeare Studies and some other programs that were very important at that stage in the university's development. And Phil was generous and gave us some space to get started. And I think it could even be this very room right now here in the Campbell Center. It was here in this complex someplace. And so we had a space to start. And I don't think Phil came to the original organizational meeting, but I remember meeting with him and Jean a number of times and talking about this and really asking for his support, which is critical to making it successful at the beginning. It was something the university had not been doing, but had the resources to enable through the extended campus programs. And we were an entrepreneurial unit. We didn't receive any general fund, state tax dollars to do what we were doing. We supported what we did mainly through tuition and fees, and occasionally through grants. But we had the capacity to shift money, kind of the Robin Hood effect, we had some programs that were very successful that were making money, and we could shift the profits from those programs into other programs. And I think we subsidized SOLIR for maybe 2 to 3 years at the beginning because it was not paying all of the expenses that were associated with it. And we also provided almost all of the marketing support because we marketed the programs in our materials, and we did the payroll, we did those financial transactions, all of the accounting. I had oversight over it from the beginning financially and legally, and had to kind of work out all of that during the early years. But when I came here in 1979, I was about 30 years old, and I was all but dissertation. Came here, and then in a couple years later, I went back and finished my dissertation and got my degree, my Ph.D. from the University of Northern Colorado. But when I came here, continuing education. It was called the DCE, the Division of Continuing Education, which incidentally has made a comeback as a name after being phased out. Division of Continuing Education was summer programs at the university and credit programs that were offered off campus, primarily in Medford, but we also offered classes in Klamath Falls, Coos Bay, Roseburg, and Grants Pass. So we had these, that was mainly a nursing program that was offered off campus at a time when SOU's nursing program was not part of a statewide program, but was centered here on this campus. And we offered programs in business and real estate and, you know, a variety of different things, but it was a very small operation. And so the reason I was fortunate to get a job here and started running these programs. And as I said, it was during an era where there was quite a bit of flexibility. And I quickly realized, along with other people that worked in what eventually became the extended campus programs, that the best way for us to be viable was to find ways to earn our own keep, to have revenues from the programs and products that we offered, which, you know, were credit classes, non-credit classes. We did conferences and workshops. We did contracted training. We got in early in computer training when nobody else was doing it. We did a lot of that for a number of years. We did continuing professional education for school teachers, and we did some for lawyers. We did it for real estate agents. We did it for a variety of professions. And so my interest kind of became, it was fun to operate an entrepreneurial unit within the university because it was during an era when we had a lot of flexibility. And it was really satisfying to me to be involved with these programs where people could dream up a good idea or hear about something like we heard about these institutes and then actually make it happen. That was pretty exciting. I stayed very involved for about 3 to 4 years in that I pretty much went to every SOLIR council meeting. I think we met monthly. Because I was responsible for the program. And we did hire a coordinator, and I met with that person occasionally. There were, you know, all of the sort of usual struggles that new organizations, you know, have to cope with. There was a lot of debate about what we should charge. And I cannot remember if we initially settled on a fee of $50 a year or $75, but it was one of those, I think. And then we soon realized that wasn't enough. And so during those early years, there was a lot of talk about, well, we need to raise the fees a little bit. And eventually we did raise them to $100. And I think it stayed $100 for a long time. Well, I'm sure that the major cost was the staff time. You know, we assigned I don't remember today, but I would guess we probably assigned maybe a 0.25 or possibly a 0.5 staff person to work with the organization. And, you know, that would have required, I don't know, between $5,000 and $10,000 in staff costs, I would guess, at that time. And then there was some equipment that had to be, and we were able to borrow and use equipment that we used for other programs for the most part, but there were things that had to be bought, supplies. There were some marketing materials that were produced directly from SOLIR after the first year or two. So, you know, you have to pay for the artwork and pay for the layout, pay for the printing, pay for the distribution, mailing costs. I don't think it was a large budget, you know, maybe it was $15,000 a year or whatever, but you know, it takes a lot of people, well, it'd take 150 people paying $100 to get to that, you know, budget. And when you had, I noted someplace in my notes that in I think it was 1993, possibly 1994, we had 257 members. So, you know, it took us a while to build up to the numbers where just the membership alone was a substantial amount. Oh, just getting the council viable and the organization viable. It was pretty contentious. There were some members of SOLIR, members of the council, and some people who had some pretty strong feelings that the university should not charge anything for these programs, that they should be, and it certainly shouldn't be charging for facilities, and you know, it was contentious to get people to recognize that there really were costs that the university incurred to make it happen. And so, you know, kind of getting everybody on the same page. There were people that thought we should pay instructors. There were some people that thought there should even be academic credit for some of the programs. And this was, when we started this, there were, you know, to my knowledge, you know, maybe a dozen of these around the country at the most. We were early on in the learning and retirement movement, the institute movement. And so it wasn't that there was a formula that you could really look to and say, well, this is the way these things are done. And probably not even today, you probably can't say that, but it was certainly less true then. I think it was more of an era of experimentation and, you know, maybe we should try this or that. Should the courses be parallel with academic terms? You know, how often should they meet? You know, how are we going to handling security was a big thing. Buildings open at a time that there wasn't other staffing. So it was just kind of those early struggles with starting something that hadn't existed before. Well, you got to credit Bill and Lee Simmons for dealing with the I'm just talking now the first year or two, because that's when when it was very difficult. And there were, I mean, I think there were people that walked out of meetings. It was just, you know, people were vested in the idea, but they had strong feelings about how it ought to be done. And it was kind of hard. So, but I would say after that initial period, then the council kind of did coalesce and had a series of great presidents of the council, you know, people who were volunteered. It was usually easy to get people to be on the council because people liked the idea. I don't think it's as, you know, it's kind of prestigious now, I think, for people to get on the OLLI council or to, you know, be part of the leadership, because it's a really, you know, known as a great organization, but you kind of had to earn that. But for the most part, it was pretty easy to get people to teach, you know, to give their time to teach and to volunteer to do different things. And I know our liaisons, I think as we called them, often had people that would come in and help stuff envelopes and you know, deliver programs out to different places and things. So I think OLLI's had or SOLIR then had a you know, that spirit of volunteerism was pretty strong. And you know how Ashland is. I mean, people volunteer to do so many things, and that was true then even as it is now. Oh, I just think it was, we were in the right place at the right time. And when I say we, I'm talking about the 4 or 5 people that kind of got it going. And I guess I'm proud that we could foresee that this would be a good fit for this community. And you know, over the years, I mean, now and then in some other capacity, I'll run into somebody and they'll tell me about this great organization I should find out about, and it'll turn out to be OLLI. And you know, that feels very satisfying to me, because people talk about how good it is when you especially when you first move to this community. It's a way of getting an entree into the community and meeting a bunch of other like-minded people who share your interest in learning new things. And so that you know, that feels satisfying to me. I remember from that first conversation with President Cox to conversations that we've had over the years, there was always the hope that SOLIR and later OLLI would become a pillar that would support the university in the community, that would support the other work of the university. You know, maybe there are stories of some of these learning institutes for learning and retirement where a member of the OLLI equivalent, you know, donated an academic building on a campus, or, you know, endowed an academic chair. So one of the, you know, hopes, and it's still a hope, I think, for OLLI, is that it can be a way of supporting the university, because a small regional university like SOU struggles in the contemporary environment and can never have enough support. But having a strong base of supporters that are smart and interested and involved in a lot of other organizations, and in some cases have some financial resources, you know, can really help the university. So that's still a part of the vision that I hope is still there. My own philosophy of life is that, you know, the things that are really important, there are really only two things that are important, which is that you know, you have to keep your life interesting, and you need to contribute to your community. And if I were to think about OLLI, I would say OLLI keeps your life pretty interesting, and OLLI contributes to your community. So my own personal values, things that I think are really important, really are very aligned with OLLI. And so I think it's a way to, I mean, there are a lot of, you know, social benefits, but you know, life is too short to, you know, not continue to learn new things and keep it interesting and find interesting people to share your time with, and OLLI does that.